So my purpose in this presentation is to give a little bit of background about the whole program, especially the Strategic Research Area program in Sweden. This provides kind of a backdrop for the main topic today, and I'll try to also connect this to the development goals that were discussed during the morning. So, strategic research areas in Sweden can be a way to catalyze excellent research. It can also be a way to stimulate education. It could be a way also to show from the Swedish perspective what we're good at, but also maybe from outside to even lift Swedish research into the international context. So there were many different goals that were in focus when the Strategic Research Area program was launched. Sustainability was maybe not one of the main goals, but at least at that time, the challenges for society were connected to all of the areas that were identified for this program. We heard just that interdisciplinary research is also an important component in our strategic research areas. So when this was launched, which was in connection with the research bill more than 10 years ago, so 12 years ago, it was going to be a long-term and strategic investment. And at that time, we had two programs that were long-term, that were very large-scale, and there were many other funding agencies which also had focused on centers of excellence and centers which could be, say, from 5 to 10 years. So this was a period, say, within Swedish research policy where there were a lot of large investments that were made in research mainly, and this longer term, so 6 to 10 years, was also something that was uncommon before that. But around 2006, this started to be one of the main ways to channel new money into the research system, and also to catalyze, I think, a new way to do research. So this long-term aspect was very important. And for this particular program, trying to develop profile areas for research, especially areas that would be of benefit to society. And a goal, even at the time when it was announced, was to stimulate education, although how that should be done was not really specified. But also, this should be built on research at universities, and it should be at the highest international level. This should really profile the strengths of Swedish research. So the framework for this was first that the government identified a certain number of areas, actually a rather large number of areas, where strategic research investments would be made. And finally, 43 different centers of excellence were funded through this program. And about 5 billion Swedish crowns was allocated over a 10-year period. And so I guess about 500 million euros. And this is maybe not a large amount in the context of some other countries, but I think for Sweden, this was really one of the biggest such programs that had ever been created. And previous programs had been initiated mainly by the research funders, and this was actually on the government level, which was also kind of an unusual way to do this. And I think this also challenged, in a way, the university's perspective on what role should the government have in trying to move research at the universities in a certain direction. So this was not an uncontroversial step. And for Lund, who we just heard, was very successful in several of these different national competitions, whether they were done on the government level or on the level of a single or combined funding agency. We had, at the end of 2010, received funding for roughly 30 different centers of rather different character. The Linné projects were 10-year programs, and they were sort of like a large research project involving many groups, but still quite centered on research and more or less handled by researchers. Whereas the strategic research areas, they had a completely different sort of dignity within this landscape, and these were really, they were applied for by the vice chancellors of the universities, and there should be also a discussion on trying to identify which researchers should really be involved in these, and how to highlight the university's research. And again, Lund was very, very successful, receiving 9 grants coordinated by Lund University, and 8 of those involved other universities. And then Lund was also part of 3 other grants that went to other universities. So this also was a step from the Linnaeus program, which mainly involved a single university, to trying to open up, identify gaps that could be filled by researchers from another university, and also starting to work in, I think, a new way together with other researchers. But this was also a challenge, I think, for us as a university, for university management, and probably also to understand how should we structure this within our faculties and departments. How should we really work with these? So for Lund, it's about 200 million Swedish crowns per year. And presently, the Swedish research areas that we work in, we have a large number, so I guess about 58% of personnel within our strategic research area grants. They are within medicine, medical research. About 27% within engineering, roughly 13% within climate, and only 2% within social sciences and humanities. So this, I think, also reflects another, maybe controversial aspect, is that we weren't really able to engage a lot of humanities and social sciences in these programs, which actually were also aimed at societal challenges, where I think these areas are clearly of high value. And they involve quite a large number of researchers within Lund University. I think about 20% of our researchers are one way or another included in one or even more than one strategic research area. And we've also seen that a lot of PhDs are awarded within these different areas. So within medical and life science, 557 over the period 2010 to 2018. 2010 was the first year of this grant, so things have developed since then. Within climate, 47, engineering, 159, and social sciences, 6 degrees have been awarded over this period. But what do these areas really mean for Lund University? From the beginning, research of the highest quality, so our best researchers went together and they wrote these applications, and already the areas that were identified should be of high value for society. But how to really engage on a broad level, researchers from different parts of the university, researchers from different universities, in order to address these challenges, but also to be able to respond to changes that take place. For example, the coronavirus. This developed very rapidly, and we need to have a way to be able to quickly address these issues and quickly also communicate on a national level. And then it's also become clear that these strategic research areas, which I may start calling more and more centers of excellence, they shouldn't just be about research. We've been talking about societal challenges, we've been talking about impact, but also education has to be a central part of this. And maybe that's not always obvious, how education and stimulated education, developing education close to these research areas, what mechanisms we actually have when the investment goes into research. And these areas are also, I think, rather well funded in the sense that they can provide very attractive environments, but also attractive resources for recruiting new people, both PhD students and also staff. But they also can maybe take a risk and conduct research, look at very ambitious goals, and try to do something that you wouldn't usually attempt to do on a 3 or 4 year research contract. and being able to engage a lot of different researchers with different skills and different networks is also, I think, a new aspect of this. So, as I said, a large number of researchers are involved, but about 70% of the staff in our strategic research areas are actually researchers, and 22% on the average over this 10-year period are PhD students. And this is not really legible for hardly even for me, but it was to really show that among all these different researchers, about 25% of the publications are in medicine. About 15% are, say, within biodiversity, genetics, molecular biology, and then almost all the rest are scattered among a huge number of different subjects. And I think this also represents the diversity of researchers within these different centers of excellence. And a lot, but not all, of the publications from our centers of excellence are with international collaborations, but these are the ones which are most well cited and seem to make the most impact, at least scientifically. But still, a certain percentage, about 20%, are only within Lund University, and this is actually quite surprising. And we can also look at the growth in terms of personnel within each of the individual centers that we have. And this diagram shows from the beginning, 2010, until today, how the number of staff have increased. And this number of staff includes PhD students. And in certain areas, so PhD students are hired for 4 to 5 years, and there may be actually a dip which takes place now, since the future funding of these centers is actually quite unclear at the moment. But in certain areas, for example, biocare, which is cancer research, the number of researchers has increased by, something like a factor of 3 or 4. And this reflects, I think, maybe a different perspective of how to organize the environment. So there are many different perspectives on how, what kind of researchers should be involved, how should we set the borders for this, how open should they be, and how much should they focus on maybe research excellence or on a broader agenda. And this is just one way to show that they are very, very different just within Lund University. And this means also that, the structure of these different centers of excellence is very different. The leadership is very different, and the strategies are also put together in different ways. And many of these centers of excellence evolved from many years of working together. Some of them were also rather active within the Linnaeus programs, but a few of them really started from zero in 2010. And I think here there's been a quite significant and very important development to bring together researchers who hadn't worked together before this strategic research area program was launched. And I think those are maybe some of the most interesting cases to look at. But today's topic has to do with the Sustainable Development Agenda, so I thought I would say a couple words on this. One of the organizations that's really been pushing this, so developing the agenda and pushing it through, is the United Nations. Maybe they're not a model for being efficient and having clear interfaces towards research, but they have a clear interface towards society. But they've had quite a lot of focus on how to create a more efficient dialogue with researchers in order to influence policy. And there was, in December, there was a conference that addressed this rather directly. And a few of the conclusions that came from that conference had to do with how universities really align to the Sustainable Development Agenda, and how to really optimize the way that university research can be taken in to different policy decisions, and also to be used in organizations such as United Nations, but actually many, many others. So it was very clear that key linkages between research and policy are often non-existent or usually not sufficient for good communication. But it was also clear that many research organizations, so universities, do actually align their goals with strategic development goals, and that they're often reflected in the agenda and strategies for universities. And then we heard this morning that probably this is true, but how much do we actually see this as a driving force for the direction of our research? And I thought it was maybe a good idea to say something about what do our centers of excellence actually look at, and to come up with a couple of examples that I thought were particularly relevant for the strategic development or sustainable development agenda. One of these is migration, and this was a prototype study for this United Nations report. And they found that, of course, migration, this requires lots of different disciplines. It requires not only an understanding of what kind of effects are driving migration, but also what kind of things can we do to mitigate and to understand that. And here you could see very clearly that collaborative research actually shows that you have to have from the beginning an interdisciplinary perspective, but if you really want the outcome of this research to make some impact, I think that there has to be a systematic way of channeling the research towards policymakers, which is embedded in the structures of the research organizations. So that the current collaboration schemes was kind of the result of many different initiatives that later on were brought together instead of having a systematic, structured approach to trying to, from the beginning, bring together different researchers and set a joint agenda. And I think this is something that we could consider. Our centers of excellence, they do cut across subject and faculty borders. This picture shows for each of the 12 different centers of excellence, which say researchers or research groups from the different faculties are involved. And we can see in the blue column, which is medicine, there's actually the 5 different centers of excellence in medicine are certainly represented, but also several of the others are shown here, but perhaps there could be more. We see that social science is actually involved in quite a few different centers of excellence, even though one, the Middle East in the contemporary world, is the only one which is actually managed by the social sciences or placed within that faculty. But we see also that there are many faculties who are not a part of our centers of excellence. And I think this is something that Lund University has to consider. How can we open up? How can we utilize other parts of the university in order to make sure that our results are communicated and that we understand how to use them? But for Lund University, it's also important that each of the centers of excellence has goals and strategies which align to our vision. So for Lund, these profile areas are really central to, say, realizing our own vision. And that, as we heard, we have now a research school focusing on the Agenda 2030. And so the intersection of the goals of many of our centers of excellence and the agenda makes it also align more or less automatically with our own goals. But we still need to see how this can really lead to some impact. And we're not just using buzzwords, as we heard this morning. So for Lund, it's important to come up with a strategy for how should we work with our centers of excellence? What expectations do we have? And how can we ensure that they work to develop our own strategic goals? We need to also, I think, on at least some level, be aware of the strengths and weaknesses within the centers of excellence, but also which areas we do not address, that we maybe do have the capacity to address that are not within the formal centers. And through all the experience that we have with the Linnaeus Centers, other programs, and the Strategic Research Initiative, we have a lot of experience on how to work in these kind of environments, not only the structure and organization, but also the leadership and how to renew the agenda and renew the strategies. So I think this is something that we also need to acknowledge and to work on how we can use this in the future. This morning, there was quite a bit of discussion about communication, both within the university and also how we can communicate outside so that these centers can be visible, but also about leadership and responsibility. And very briefly, the expectations that Lund University has for these centers cover a number of different points. We expect that there should be research that is developed and goals that are identified in a dialogue with society, in a dialogue with shareholders. And I think there's some areas where this is a very, very clear route, and others where those interfaces are really not very easy to identify and mechanisms are difficult. And we need to also develop a strategy that we actually use for communicating the research and the development both within the university and outwards. And then ensuring that research also stimulates education. A lot of steps have been taken in the last 5 years to identify what can be done easily and then what can be done maybe in a more intense dialogue with those who are actually teaching. So I think we're making a lot of progress there. And then leadership is important, and leadership is also a key to success here. But renewal, both of the agenda and the goals, the strategies for each of our strategic research areas, but maybe even being able to develop new areas which are not really on the list today is a challenge that we have to be able to meet. So we have worked now on a vision for our centers of excellence. The fact that they're interdisciplinary, as I showed, they involve many people from different faculties, from different departments. And this means that they don't fit into our usual, say, structures, which are the faculties at Lund University are very independent, and they, going across faculty borders and communicating, lifting these environments, there isn't really an obvious channel for that yet. So this has been one of the things that we have worked on developing in the last few years. And the collegium, as it's called, of the heads, the directors of our centers of excellence, has now also really formed a good dialogue with me and also with other parts of the university. But I think we can use that to engage a lot more researchers. And each of the centers of excellence has developed its own vision and strategy, which has been renewed every 5 years. And we've also discussed how to share responsibility, say, for recruitment and for developing further strategies and trying to understand what we need to strengthen. So we have also a communication channel called Mission is Possible that's focused only on the research which takes place within the strategic research areas or our centers of excellence. And these are a few of the topics that are developed there. You can find this on the web. And I wanted to show 2 cases which are very different centers of excellences, but actually seem to be maybe 2 sides of the same coin. Beck, which is focusing on biodiversity and ecosystem services in a changing climate. They integrate many, many different aspects, but they have also a very strong focus on societal interaction, creating meeting places, and also pilot studies for future projects that involve many stakeholders. And I think they have the most clearly defined need to actually have a dialogue with mainly local and regional and national authorities. So they have mechanisms to align research with the needs of society, and these are very clearly stated in their strategy. But we have also the Middle East and the Contemporary World Center, which also has a focus on natural resources and the environment, but coming from a very, very different point of view. And research topics here include use of water, hydropolitics, post-conflict, and also using digital techniques, so geographical information systems to improve efficient water use. And so this is also looking at natural resources, but from the point of view of governance and policy making. And I think it's actually quite interesting to see that both of these two are addressing the same kind of issues, but using a rather different part of the university. But both are equally important and probably making impact in very different ways. And I guess it's always interesting to see what's happened during the last 10 years. I showed the number of staff, but maybe it's also interesting to look at how publications have developed. And in fact, the number of publications at Lund University and even within the Centers of Excellence has actually decreased last year compared to the year before. But the most interesting thing here, I think, is that most of these centers have really increased the number of publications during this last period, and some of them with very, very dramatic amount, mainly due to rather different effects. In some cases, increasing the number of researchers, but in others also really deciding that in order to make impact, we need to work on a higher level, international publications, and to work in a very different way. So that was my background that I hope will provide a bit of a context for some of the discussions today from the Swedish and Lund point of view. And so thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Stacey Ristinmaa Sörensen. Let's see if we have any questions from Menti. I'm looking at Tina Trollos. She's the Menti moderator over here, also from the arranging committee. Let's see what questions. Will the Lund University SFOs exist in 2030?
Absolutely.
That's a short and sweet answer.
Well, they may not look like they do today, because I think a few things may have changed in the next 10 years, and we have to be able to address those new challenges, maybe by working together from the basis that we have now defined in our centers of excellence. But I think we probably also have to demonstrate that we can work on developing new groups that will work on other issues which we don't have on the horizon today.
Thank you. How do you see the future of the SFO funding at Lund University?
At the moment, we have the situation that the SFO funding is mainly coming directly from the government, and from year to year we wonder, will this be the same next year or not? And the government has also pointed out which areas we can use this money for. So together with the lack of, say, control of this money and its future, we're in the hands of the government. So I think the best scenario is that the money comes to Lund University and that we can continue to use this for this kind of strategic research. And then the question is, if many of our centers of excellence today involve other universities, how will we do that in the future when Lund University, Gothenburg, Uppsala, and the other universities also have received this money as part of their block grant?
I have a question. What would you say is the main challenge or the main challenges in creating centers of excellence at the university?
Well, so far, we've always done this in response to a government call. In this case, they pointed out the areas. In earlier cases, they've been maybe broader areas, but it's always been somebody else putting the bag of money on the table. And then it's not easy, but it's something we know how to do. We know how to put together good researchers who sit down and come up with a great idea to get money. But if we want to actually do that within Lund University, I think it's going to be a huge challenge for us.
In what way?
Well, to be able to define the criteria and to define the areas where we think we want to develop, or I mean, we can develop the ones we have today or we can develop new ones, but to really take control of that ourselves, I think will be a big challenge.
I have one more question. I think we're running out of the Menti questions. The main challenges in ensuring sustainability work in these centers of excellence.
Well, I think that so these centers of excellence had research in focus, and we heard that also this morning. And maybe it's easy to say that, say, cancer, diabetes, these are really important diseases, and just by doing research here, we will be helping society at some point along the way.
Tangible, very tangible. Yeah.
But I think if we could come up with a strategy that's integrated in the way that we work, that can address this in a more specific and concrete way. I think, as I pointed out, this does exist within a couple of our strategic research areas, but I think we need to consider how we could do that and what we need to do that, what gaps there are, much more than we've done so far, if we really want to do that. Maybe it's not an issue, maybe not all of these centers of excellence are the right ones to do that, but certainly some of them I think are extremely well poised for making a huge difference.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation and for answering all our questions. Thank you very much.